Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, we were shown a fake human footprint, a rock that kind of looked like a finger, but which absolutely was not one. And now, Carl seems to be ready to show us some artificially created objects found in rocks that science says are far too old to have any such objects in them. This is in service to the argument that this would violate the timeline one can draw from evolutionary biology, meaning that something is fundamentally wrong about the story of the history of life we derive from evolutionary biology. This would indeed cause that problem if there were such objects, but it wouldn't actually add any evidence for Carl's favorite idea of young Earth creationism, because this isn't a dichotomy between what we have learned from science and Christian young Earth creationism. There are Hindu ancient Earth options, old Earth creationism, and an indefinite number of other possibilities. You can just make up your own that isn't young Earth creationism or evolution. Anyway, here's Carl.
Show us an actual man-made artifact to show that we're talking about intelligent man. We're talking about a prototype. In our opinion, those long ages are not there at all.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
In our opinion, the world before the flood, in the equispheric balance, which we will discuss.
Equispheric balance is certainly a series of syllables allowed by English phonotactics. In case you're wondering, equispheric isn't a word, and equisphere isn't a word outside of a brand of metal alloy additive powder. The company that makes it was founded in Canada in 2015, so I'm pretty sure that that's not what Carl is talking about. I'm pretty sure he just made up a word on the spot that sounded fancy and just trusted that his audience is too dumb to notice. Once again, few people have more contempt for the intelligence of creationist laity than the professional creationists do.
Shortly, that world before the flood in its equispheric balance would have produced the optimal genetic expression of living forms.
The Enterprise computer system is controlled by 3 primary main processor cores, cross-linked with redundant Mellicort's Ramostat 14 kiloquad interface modules.
And thus, they were intelligent people.
I guess the way to get smart is to equispherize your genetic expression, and here I thought you had to secure your tremafem to prevent side fumbling in your boloid stators. Well, the more you know.
I brought from Safety Deposit the real artifact, a very special artifact.
I love how he says the real artifact because he knows how fake basically everything in his museum is. So he has to assure us that this is totally real, you guys. He's totally serial.
It is the London artifact. It's a hammer, a man-made artifact.
Yep, it sure is man-made. It's named after London, Texas, where it was found in 1936.
We're currently having
a Mitch McConnell-style blue screen?
And a string of
wood from the handle, carbon dated to give us a relative dating technique.
No. Even if you think that carbon dating doesn't work or needs to be recalibrated, it's an absolute dating technique because it gives you an age in terms of a number of time units since the material in question was part of a living organism.
Originally, it was found by Frank and Emma Hahn, now deceased, as a concretion, completely encasing all of the artifact. They simply found in an area with adjacent material like it, they found a rock with a stick protruding from the rock.
Well, allegedly, just like with the finger from last time, we don't actually have any recorded provenance for this artifact, so who knows where it came from?
They took it home. Their son, who spent years as a professor at Ohio State University, chipped the top of it off and was amazed to find inside a man-made artifact.
It's always telling what Carl does and doesn't cite. He usually gives references for his various quote mines, which is nice because sometimes they're even from sources I can access. But for claims like this, it's just nothing but his own museum, which amounts to, trust me bro. Well, I don't trust Carl. He's shown himself to be very sketchy and probably very, very dumb.
Now, this is 6 1/4 inches in length. It's very sophisticated. It's octagonal in design, has an eye, even originally had a wedge inside the handle to keep it in place.
Interestingly, it's as sophisticated as a late 19th century mining hammer, because that's what this is. It's a mining hammer with a calcium concretion around it as a result of deposition from hard water.
Now, I took this hammer to Battelle Lab in Columbus, Ohio. That's the lab that analyzed the moonstones.
Okay, not sure why that detail matters.
Same lab, same technician, same instrument analyzed this as analyzed the original moonstones. We did a scanning electron microprobe elemental analysis and found that this artifact is 96.6% iron. That's very pure iron.
Relatively, but it's well within the manufacturing capabilities of the last couple centuries.
0.74% sulfur and 2.6% chlorine. That's mind-boggling.
My mind is currently unboggled. It had to be made of something. What makes this particular composition impossible or whatever?
Our best laboratories today, our finest minds, cannot compound iron with chlorine. Yet, we have iron compounded with chlorine with a minimal amount of sulfur.
Anyone can mix iron and chlorine. 2 iron atoms plus 3 diatomic chlorine gas molecules yields 2 iron 3 chloride molecules. And remember, this kind of testing doesn't tell you what molecules are present, just what elements. So this test can't distinguish between free chlorine and iron in some impossible alloy versus just some iron that had some chloride present. Basically, the only way for this to be impossible is for chlorine to just not exist. But, chlorine does exist.
Now that's amazing. Whoever made this had to be a master artisan.
By which I assume Carl means some guy in a hammer shop in the 1800s.
We do not know if this was deposited in the worldwide flood.
No, we know pretty conclusively that it was not, because there is no such evidence such a flood ever happened, and there are literal physical mountains of evidence showing it did not. Never mind the fact that every proposed model for Noah's flood that is currently in creationist circles produces so much heat that on the safe end, Earth is a ball of lava, and on the dangerous end, it's a ball of plasma rivaling the sun in both temperature and luminosity.
Or in the Peleg experience a few hundred years after the flood.
Which never seems to be well described, even by creationists. It's almost like they don't know what to do with that obscure verse that in the days of Peleg the earth was divided. I tend to think it's a passing ideology of the split of the earth into different nations, but I also don't know with any high confidence if that's true.
We do not know when it was deposited.
I know when it was deposited, in the late 19th century, around when it was manufactured.
But we do know this. It was found and has been confirmed to have been within the same layer in which dinosaur footprints and dinosaur remains are found.
No, we don't know that, because it was just found by some guy. We don't actually have a site map. We don't have any documentation of the condition it was found in. There's no documentation of it in situ. It's literally just a hammer with some calcium and lime from hard water around it that was manufactured around a century and a half ago. Even if the guy who found the concretion the hammer was in found it on exposed Glen Rose Formation limestone, which is what Baugh is implying, that doesn't prove that that's where it originated. Because it could have been put there, it could have fallen there, it could have eroded out and come to rest there from a higher location. Everything we have points to this hammer being a mining hammer that ended up in hard water. We have literally no evidence pointing to it coming from Mesozoic rock.
Whenever this hammer was fabricated, dinosaurs were still around.
Only if by dinosaurs we're including birds, which sure were around in the 19th century, unlike now where all the birds are fake.
And as we learned a few moments ago, pterodactyl dinosaurs.
Pterodactyls aren't a real thing. It's pterosaurs, and they're not dinosaurs. You'd think that since Carl thinks he can overturn the vast majority of science, that he'd bother to get some things right. I guess that's a bridge too far.
Probably are still around.
Too bad those numerous expeditions that Carl and pals mounted found not a single shred of physical evidence of extant pterosaurs. And I mean that sincerely. Like, it would be super cool to find an extant pterosaur somewhere. It just hasn't happened, and I doubt that it will.
Here's a part of the overlay material. Inside you'll see a groove of the hammer, and this was a part of the material over the top of the artifact.
Yep, when you split open a concretion, you get to parts. That is not really worth noting since that's just how the world works, and how it's been known to work since the dawn of time.
Scholars came from global communities.
What does that mean? What scholars? What communities? Carl loves to use words like scholars and academics, and he seems to loathe ever, saying who or where their published findings are.
According to the Hans, and each would want a little fragment that they had chipped off the top of this marvelous artifact, and ultimately nothing was left but the large portion with a secondary portion.
Okay, so people took samples, and that's why the Countess lab isn't complete. That seems both plausible and entirely unnecessary to mention.
I'm trying to say that man and dinosaur did live contemporaneously.
I know, it's just that he's doing a really crap job of it.
According to the theory of evolution,
how much you want to bet that whatever he says next is actually not something predicted in evolutionary theory?
it took the granite 300 million years to crystallize.
Yep, evolutionary theory has absolutely nothing to say about granite, not even a little, but okay.
I want you to notice on this model done by world-famous artist Robert Summers, the granite as illustrated just below the surface on the planet, and this illustrates the original creation.
Ah, okay, so this represents whatever crazy fever dream Carl had about what he thinks the Bible says the Earth was like before the fall of man. What it doesn't represent is anything real, or with evidence for it. Got it.
And the granite, of course, underlies all the continents. Originally, it did underlie the sea basins as well. According to the theory of evolution, it took that granite.
Nope, evolution still doesn't have anything to say about granite because granite isn't alive, and the theory of evolution is a theory about the origin and patterns of biodiversity.
300 million years to crystallize.
Carl is off by a couple orders of magnitude. It usually takes millions, not tens or hundreds of millions of years, for a magma intrusion to cool into granite.
I have with me a piece of granite. Dr. Robert Gentry is a world-class scholar.
That's creationist for buffoon.
And Dr. Gentry has analyzed over 200,000 samples of granite worldwide.
Here come the polonium halos.
Some of these samples have been brought up from core drills deep in the crust of the earth. Some have been located on the surface of the earth as well. Now, inside this granite, you'll see little black flakes. These are normally called mica or biotite.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it. Get on with it.
This granite holds part of the answer to the question, how did we get here? You see, there are only two models. Leading evolutionary scholars have admitted the two models exhaust the possibilities. Either we were created by the direct fiat design of a personal creator, or we arrived by natural processes.
Or a creator directed natural processes by setting them up so as to reach his intended goals, or a creator used mostly natural means with the occasional supernatural intervention.
Dr. Robert Gentry, with a microscope, looked inside this black mica or biotite. He found tiny little rings called pleochroic halos from the energy radiation from radioactive materials. Now, the signature of these rings is very, very specific. And not only did he find the rings left by the decay of uranium, thorium, strontium, rubidium, potassium, argon, radioactive lead, Pb-207, etc., but he found the rings left by the radioactive decay of polonium. Polonium-218, 210, and 214. Now, remember, the evolutionary concept is that
He means the scientific concept, or maybe the geological concept.
it took 300 million years for this granite to crystallize.
More like 3 million, but okay.
Yet at all depths, Dr. Gentry found in the granite these rings left by polonium. The half-life of polonium-218 is less than 3 minutes.
That's pretty short.
Scholars in this audience will recognize that after 7 half-lives of any radioactive material, all measurable amounts of that material have been exhausted. So you can only multiply by 7 for the outside possibility of time duration. He found polonium-218 halos. Now, the half-life is less than 3 minutes. That means that in order to record that polonium-218 had been in the granite at all, this granite had to be crystallized, functional, and recording in less than 3 minutes.
Well, no, less than 21 minutes according to Ball's own logic, but his own logic, I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn, fails. First, polonium isn't primordial, it's a decay product of uranium, and all that's needed for it to appear as a polonium halo without associated uranium halos is for the polonium to be able to migrate in the crystal, which can indeed happen. It's not a miracle, it's just normal uranium decay plus a bit of internal shuffling.
At the outside, 20 minutes, but it's better still. Dr. Gentry found at all levels in this mica biotite crystalline material inside the granite the rings left by polonium-214. The half-life of polonium-214 is 0.000164 seconds.
Wow.
164 microseconds. All 7 half-lives would be expended faster than I can snap my finger. That means that if you look at the data objectively, there's no possibility of long eons of time in the formation of the granite. It means this granite had to be functional and crystallized as a part of the design of the Creator in the original creation.
Okay, I can't express in words how much I hate polonium halos, because to me it's such a boring argument. Researching this makes me want to claw something to shreds. So let's get into this a bit more in depth, because apparently I'm a masochist. Polonium halos are interestingly only found, as Gentry describes them, in granite that did not cool directly from magma, but instead was formed in part through replacement of the original minerals, and interestingly, only in granites with uranium-238, and then only from polonium isotopes that are part of the uranium-238 decay chain. Which, you know, is a bit suspicious. What a halo is basically a debris field caused by the alpha decay of some nuclide. Now, each radioactive nuclide that decays by alpha decay releases alpha particles with a particular energy. Since the mean free path length, that is the average distance it can travel before interacting with the nucleus of an alpha particle, is determined by its energy, each nuclide produces halos of a certain distance in the form of a sphere of a radius equal to the mean free path of the emitted alpha particle. Now, you may have heard that uranium-238 decays into lead-206, but it doesn't do this directly. That's what the decay chain is. The original uranium will become thorium and polonium, among other elements. Importantly, one of these elements is radon. Specifically, we're interested in radon-222. Radon-222 has a half-life of 3.8 days, which isn't very long, but it has an important property. It's a noble gas. That means that it does not normally form chemical bonds, allowing it to easily move around in a crystal, especially if the crystal is still forming through the replacement of minerals, which is always the case in the granites Gentry has identified as having his polonium halos. When radon decays, it decays into polonium-218, and then along with other stops along the way to lead-208, it may become polonium-214 and polonium-210. These are the only polonium halo sources associated with the halos Gentry is talking about. Putting all this together, we can see what's actually happening, and it's not the instantaneous creation of granite.
Let's explore one other area before pausing briefly. Is there a possibility that living systems could have evolved?
They're doing it right now, so yes.
Dr. Robert Gange, with the Smirnoff Research Facility in Princeton, New Jersey, has taken the literature from microbiological laboratories and has found that evolution is absolutely impossible. And he illustrates it like this. Inside all material is information. For instance, inside the atom, even the hydrogen atom, there's an informational exchange between the electron, the proton, the neutron. There's an informational exchange.
I mean, there are interactions via virtual photons that communicate the electromagnetic force, which is what binds electrons to nuclei. You can call that information exchange if you want, but it's kind of a weird way to put it.
Dr. Gange takes the literature published by major scholars and major laboratories at major universities to show that you can take all of the natural information, the information in all of the natural inorganic materials of the entire planet Earth, and it comes out to be 160 bits of information.
What? That makes absolutely no sense at all. 160 bits is basically nothing. If this were true, you could know literally everything there is to know about Earth by looking at a string of ones and zeros 160 digits long. There are 1.46 times 10 to the 48th possible such combinations. I'll remind you that a deck of cards with 52 cards has 8.066 times 10 to the 67th possible ways to shuffle it, which means that according to Carl, the number of ways a deck of cards can be arranged is 10 quintillion times more than the number of ways all the individual fundamental particles of the entire Earth can be arranged. Maybe he means that any one fundamental particle can be successfully described in 160 bits, but that isn't true either. In fact, you can't fully describe a fundamental particle state in any number of bits because the state is fundamentally fuzzy. The more you know about certain aspects of a particle, like its momentum, the less well-defined other aspects, such as position, are.
Now, 160 bits of information is a lot of information. Actually, 270 bits of information would be the equivalent of 10 to the 80th power. So that's a lot of information.
It's really not much information, though. My videos are usually produced at 1920 by 1080. Each one is about 2.02 megabytes. That's a lot more than 160 bits. Most of my videos contain more than 50,000 such images. Before this sentence, my script contained 78,092 characters. If they were stored in the most compact way text is normally stored, in text files, ASCII, which they're not, they're stored in a less efficient way, that means my script would have 624,736 bits of information. 270 bits is basically nothing. That's fewer than 34 ASCII characters.
All of the information and all of the natural elements of planet Earth, put together, the inorganic elements, the entire globe, that information is 160 bits of information. Let's take the entire solar system, including the globe, our Earth, the Sun, 8 other planets, asteroids, debris, etc., and it comes out to 170 bits of information. Let's take the entire universe. It comes out to be 235 bits of information.
So that means that this sentence takes about 10 times more information to store on a computer in a text file than it takes to describe the entire universe. A universe which includes a file storing this sentence.
But now let's go to living material. Living material is another ball game entirely. Living material is extremely complicated. First of all, it's three-dimensional.
All bulk matter is three-dimensional because we live in a 3D world.
And then every single component is interdependent and codependent on every other component.
Not really. You can have a nucleus and not need mitochondria. Just ask Henneguia salminicola, a parasitic jellyfish relative that parasitizes several species of salmon and entirely lacks mitochondria.
The smallest unit of living information we know anything about is a protein molecule. One protein molecule holds 1,500 bits of information. Now, did you get that?
Yes, I did get that completely impossible statement, that proteins which are part of the universe have more information than the universe. The universe cannot take less information to describe completely than the information of anything in the universe. I don't care that it's stupid to assign these numbers, because they don't mean anything. Let's just take them as is. What Ba is saying is mathematically impossible. He's trying to tell me the circle has 5 corners.
The entire universe of non-living material.
Oh, it's just the non-living material.
holds 235 bits of information, but one single non-replicating unit of living material, one protein molecule, holds 1,500 bits of information.
Okay, so let's drill into this a bit. A protein is a molecule, a big complex one, but still a molecule. It is composed of amino acids, which themselves are molecules. One of the largest known proteins is Titin, which has 132,983 carbon atoms, 211,861 hydrogen atoms, 36,149 nitrogen atoms, 40,833 oxygen atoms, and 694 sulfur atoms. That's a total of 422,569 atoms. Now, there are 94 naturally occurring elements, which means that to use information to specify which element and atom belongs, you would need at least 8 bits. That means we are now at 3,380,522 bits just to record each item in a Titin protein. But they also have a special arrangement that needs to be recorded. In computing, such coordinates are usually done in 16 or 32-bit floating point decimals, using a 3-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. I'll assume a 16-bit floating point system for recording the locations, even though really 32 or 64 might be more reasonable. This means that it now takes 10,141,656 bits to capture the location and type of atom of each component of one Titin molecule. That's about 1.27 megabytes. That's a lot compared to what Carl is telling us. But let's take a look at how much information it takes to describe a quarter liter of water. Well, under standard conditions, water is about a gram per milliliter. So let's assume that we have 250 grams of water. The molar mass of water is 18.01528 grams per mole. That means that we have 4,503.82 moles of water. If we multiply that by Avogadro's number, that is 6.023 times 10 to the 23rd, we find that we have 7.713 times 10 to the 27th molecules of water. Each has 3 atoms, so we have 8.138 times 10 to the 27th atoms. So from before, we know that we're using 24 bits to describe the type and location of each atom. So that means that a glass of water has 1.953 times 10 to the 29th bits of information, or 2.441 megabytes. And remember, this doesn't describe the energy levels, momentum, or anything else, just where each atom is and what it is. So a glass of water takes about twice as much information to record in our crude way as a Titin protein. Which means that just based on basic chemistry and some math, the non-living world would take vastly more information to completely describe than everything that's living, even if we restrict ourselves to only consider Earth. Now, you might argue that I'm defining information wrongly, and hey, maybe I am. If you think so, I invite you to give a definition that we can use to calculate with at least 3 significant figures exactly how much information is in any particular molecule or collection of molecules. Once you do that, we can figure out how to measure the information of the whole biosphere versus the whole rest of the Earth. It shouldn't actually be all that difficult, given that we have reasonable mass estimates for the biosphere and the Earth as a whole, and that we also have reasonable estimates for the elemental composition of Earth, meaning we can derive approximate numbers of atoms for both. If you're not actually willing to come up with a way to objectively quantify this information, but want to argue about it anyway, then shut the fuck up and go away. You're worthless, and so is your argument.
What's the difference between 235 bits of information and 1,500 bits of information? Light years between.
I mean, it's 1,250 bits, which isn't really light years, since light years don't really convert into bits. In fact, it's less information than is in this sentence at a minimum.
Now let's go to information that can produce a reproducing cell, a bacterium. A common bacterium is E. coli. E. coli is in the intestinal tract of every person watching this video at the moment. One single E. coli bacterium, just one, holds 7 million bits of information.
Now, I know that on screen he's been flashing up exponential bits, but that isn't a phrase that means anything, and so unless he tells me otherwise, I'm going with the assumption that when he says bit, he means bit, as in a place in a signal that can take one of 2 states. It's the most basic unit of information.
Now let's go to a human cell. One single human cell holds 20 billion bits of information. If the evolutionist wants his primordial soup pond with the right gases, energy system, and lightning strokes, give it to him. Give him an entire Earth as a primordial soup pond.
You gotta love those primordial soup ponds. I feel like we're building to a point that won't even be coherent.
Give him the entire universe. Fill the universe with electrons, and let the universe have his 15 billion years, 30 billion years. Give it an eternity of time. for each electron to writhe, cohort, and experiment with every other electron in the entire universe.
Hot electron on electron action. But also, don't you think Carl knows that electrons smashing into each other like blindfolded subs in a party scene isn't how chemistry works?
It is impossible for the entire universe, given an eternity of time, since it holds only 270 bits of information.
Which again is impossible since it can't hold less information than the sum of its parts, which would include all the living things. And of course, there's no conservation of information principle that's been proposed that prevents low information matter from producing higher information matter. And since we don't know how this information is being measured, we can't say a damn thing about what the universe could or could not produce on the basis of information content.
To produce a single protein molecule, let alone a reproducing bacterium, or ultimately a human cell.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
Watch this and we'll break. A book has been written recently by a major scholar in Australia, Michael Denton, Evolution, Theory in Crisis.
By major scholar, BA means Discovery Institute fraud. That book was published in 1986, and you might have noticed that in the nearly 4 decades since, evolution seems to have not collapsed. It's almost like it was never a theory in crisis, something even acknowledged by young Earth creationist Todd Wood.
And Dr. Denton admitted, evolution just won't work. He's an evolutionist, but it just won't work.
If Michael Denton is an evolutionist, then I'm the goddamn tooth fairy.
He said, for instance, in the cell, the DNA provides the information for the protein synthesis apparatus. Yet, it's that protein synthesis apparatus that provides the very proteins for the DNA to exist.
Good thing RNA can self-assemble from nucleic acids and can synthesize proteins all on its lonesome then, huh?
That protein synthesis apparatus provides the protein phosphate compounds for the energy system, yet the energy system, of mitochondria, etc., provides the actual energy for the protein synthesis to function.
Good thing we know about things like non-living hypercycles that manage to have metabolisms without needing the complex protein and genetic materials present in even mitochondria.
That protein synthesis provides the proteins for the cell membrane, yet the membrane holds that entire synthesis apparatus intact.
Good thing the simplest membrane is a lipid bilayer that doesn't need proteins, which is how the metabolism of the previously mentioned hypercycles is contained.
In other words, everything is interdependent and codependent on everything else. Evolution just won't work.
Cool story, bro. That's the end of his first episode. But it's not the end of this episode. We're diving into the second episode. Why? I don't know. Maybe I just have low self-esteem and feel like I deserve to be tortured for your entertainment. Which means, hey, if you like listening to my voice as my brain matter slowly liquefies because of all this stupidity, maybe subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and check out my Patreon, or join the channel here on YouTube. There are links in the description.
From the very beginning of the creation, a marvelous design has been evident. All nature abounds with evidence of creation and a creator. Venture into this exciting realm with an open mind and a commitment to truth.
I love how Ba, a notoriously dishonest man, is on a show asking us to have a commitment to truth.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Creation in Symphony.
I do not feel welcome. I also noticed that Carl is calling himself a PhD, but he has even less cause to use that as a label than does Kent Hovind, because at least Kent's fake degree is from a fake university that physically exists. Carl doesn't even have that. He has a fake degree from nowhere, not even a diploma mill, so that's fun.
In the last session, we learned that evolution just won't work, admitted by major scholars in major scientific fields of discipline.
That's a funny way to say, in the last session, I lied about scientists to pretend they don't think evolution works when they do, and lied about other scientists to pretend that they knew a single damn thing about biology or geology, when in fact, they were astrophysicists without a clue about either.
But will creation work? How did the dinosaurs fit into the creation model? If everything is recent, why don't we have dinosaurs around anymore?
I really do not understand the obsession with dinosaurs from young Earth creationists. It's like they think that the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous is some central dogma of evolutionary biology, and if anything indicated late surviving dinosaurs, it would collapse the whole edifice of biology. It really wouldn't. And they should realize that, given what happened with organisms like the coelacanth or the Wollemi pine, both were thought extinct since the Cretaceous, and when they were found alive, the response was, oh, I guess only most of them went extinct. That's neat.
Is there a worldwide flood experience recorded in the scientific data?
I feel like the word no doesn't even begin to cover the amount of negation that question requires. It's like I need a new grammatical category, like super negation, for when you need to indicate that not only is a statement false, but it's so false that the opposite is true. Carl has not just put me at a loss for words, but a loss for grammar.
What research avenue will give us some conclusive answers to this?
Geology, and it has already given us answers. The problem for Ba here is that the answers are definitely not the ones he wants.
Well, let's now consider the creation model in detail. I'd like to present to you Creation in Symphony, the complete model.
All right, let's see it.
The creation model is stated like this initially: in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Ah yes, a scientific model that starts out with just Genesis 1:1 being literally true as an axiom. That bodes well.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good.
Okay, we're not going to sit and just listen to Genesis 1. I'm sure that most of my audience is familiar with the text, and for those who are not, just Google Genesis chapter 1 and it'll pop up in like a million translations as well as the original Hebrew, as well as the antiquity translations of the Septuagint and the Peshitta, which are Greek and Aramaic respectively.
The creation model answers so many problems.
Okay, so that's good. That's what scientific models are supposed to do. The key thing a model in science does is allow us to make predictions that we could not make without it, as well as explain what might otherwise seem to be unrelated data points in terms of the framework of the model, so we can tease out causal relationships in the data. If creationism wants to be taken seriously as science, the bare minimum it needs is a model that explains all current data under its purview, at least as well as the scientific understanding, and also that makes better predictions about the future than current scientific models. If that's what Carl's got, then I might have to pivot my channel and rename it Truth Dino, or Christ Truth Ministries Dinosaur Division, or something like that. Put in the comments suggestions for what my new channel name should be when Carl shows his amazing creation model that returns me to the fold of young Earth creationism.
It begins like this: in the beginning, God. I will not in this lecture, nor any series of lectures or private conversation, attempt to define or prove the existence of God.
Well then, it's going to be really hard to take this model seriously when the first and most important thing is that it is neither defined nor argued to even be real. I'm starting to feel like I might not need any of those new channel names, but hey, it's early in the episode, so maybe I'll still be changing my mind.
As Werner von Braun, one of the greatest scientists of this century, stated, why do we need a candle to light the influence of the sun? God needs no proof. In the beginning, God existed. He always has existed.
See, the difference is that it's hard for people to honestly disagree about the existence of the sun or that it produces strong light. People do seem to disagree about divinity, whether it exists at all and in what manner. In an area where people can disagree in good faith, you're going to have to argue for your position if you want people to take it seriously. The existence of God is one of those areas as far as I can tell.
If I or any other speaker or communicator or scholar could give you proof of God, that would essentially mean academically that we would have created God or held the capacity to create God.
Let's use this with another noun. If I or any other speaker could prove the existence of elephants, it would mean that we have the capacity to create elephants. I feel like I can show someone quite conclusively that elephants exist, by example, going to a zoo. But I am also pretty sure that I don't have it within my power to simply will elephants into existence. This makes no sense whatsoever and sounds like simple special pleading to get out of having to make an argument for the existence of God, which to me says more about the intellectual shortcomings of Ba's approach to the question of the existence of God than it does anything about God himself.
We cannot create God. He created us. Therefore, I do not suggest a proof for God. I simply expose evidences that He does exist.
Okay, so now we're not using proof in the colloquial sense, as I had rather assumed, but we mean it in the more formal logical sense, and so we recognize that evidence pointing to a conclusion, but not formally proving it, is still something to recognize. Which, hey, that's great, I agree. But then, what was the whole point of Carl saying that he wasn't going to argue for the existence of God? Pointing to things he thinks makes God existence more likely is exactly arguing for the existence of God. See what I mean? This guy rambles and contradicts worse than a large language model AI chatbot.
In fact, I'd like to give you the statements of some of the leading scholars of the world in various areas of scientific discipline.
Nope, Carl spent almost the whole of episode 1 just quote mining. I'm not doing it again. We'll cut back in after he's done attempting to slander scientists. I don't care about that. I care about data. Something that some scientists said outside of his field isn't important.
We can observe the universe and find various factors in existence. For instance, there's limitless space.
That is not something we know with any confidence. At most, we can say that there's so much space that we could never reach the end of it, should there be such a thing.
Unending time.
That's also not clear, as it seems that the arrow of time gets its directionality from proximity to an extreme period of low entropy, and that perhaps with a high entropy universe, time would not be so directional. Of course, this also gets into things like the A and B theories of time. Time very well may have an end, we just don't know, and we don't even know if that would mean anything.
Perpetual motion.
You'd think that as someone who makes such a big deal out of the second law of thermodynamics, Carl wouldn't then go on to say that perpetual motion exists. But hey, if he actually knew what he was talking about, it would be hard for him to be a young Earth creationist.
Unbounded variety. Infinite complexity.
I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. The world isn't made of actual mathematical fractals. So I'm going to go ahead and say that unless these terms are way better defined than this is either false or nonsense.
Look further and you'll find consciousness, feeling, will. You'll observe ethical values, religious values, beauty, justice, love, and life. No one could deny these entities exist.
I'm not aware that anyone is. I'm really hoping that this doesn't turn into a discussion about the problem of consciousness. I don't have a solution for it, and the fact that there is a mystery out there doesn't negate what else we know about things that are not so mysterious.
As Dr. Henry Morris pointed out, the first cause of limitless space has to be infinite in extent.
Why? What indicates this? A single spark can cause a huge explosion. The assassination of one archduke can cause most of the world to end up in a war over nothing that matters to most participants. Small things can cause big effects. Why is it different for the origin of the universe? Is it because if the universe is special, then it means that Carl's prior conclusions are true? You know, could it be post hoc nonsense?
Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is.
The first cause of unending time must be eternal in duration.
Same problem as before. This needs to be argued for, not just asserted.
The first cause of perpetual motion must be omnipotent in power.
That one I might actually be willing to accept, since if it existed, perpetual motion would be a miracle. If we found something so obviously impossible, then a miracle would actually be a pretty plausible explanation to me.
The first cause of unbounded variety must be omnipresent in phenomena.
It just occurred to me that I could set up a frequency harmonic between the deflector and the shield grid using the warp field generator as a power flow anti-attenuator, and that, of course, naturally created an amplification of the inherent energy output.
See that?
The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient in intelligence.
Really? Well, I'm not omniscient, so let's see if I can create infinite complexity. Okay, so take the complex number plane, and on it, plot those values which we will call c, where the function of c in respect to the number z equals z squared plus c, and where the value of c is then recursively changed to the new value onto infinity. And z starts at 0. Those values for c, where the values of z is unbounded, will be in the set to be plotted, and those where the value of c is unbounded will be outside of the set to be plotted. Oh no! Look, I just made the Mandelbrot set, which is famously infinitely complex. And I didn't actually have to be omniscient to do it. That was an easy one.
The first cause of consciousness must be personal.
Why? We're just back to statements that I can see no reason must be necessarily true. Maybe it's true, but if it is, I'd need an actual reason to think so.
The first cause of feeling must be emotional. The first cause of will must be volitional. The first cause of ethical values must be moral. The first cause of religious values must be spiritual. The first cause of beauty must be aesthetic. The first cause of justice must be just. The first cause of love must be loving. The first cause of life must be living.
My only response to this is just one big old citation needed.
My friend, I submit to you that the first cause of the universe, the designer of the entire universe.
The first cause does not need to be a designer. Perhaps the first cause is Azathoth, the idiot god who mindlessly dreamed our reality into existence, and whose waking will cause our reality to cease existing like a candle flame being snuffed out, which is why we must ensure that the piping of the outer gods which keeps him lulled to sleep endures. For this reason, the crawling chaos is sent out to the various worlds to ensure that the will of his masters such as Yog-Sothoth, the gate and the key, is done, and that Azathoth, the demon sultan, never wakes.
The designer of the entire universe is the God of the Bible. There is no other plausible candidate.
Sure there is. Maybe it's Brahma. Maybe it's Ptah. Maybe it's Hori Nodens.
The God of the Bible is the God of creation.
Maybe, but in order to argue for that, one would have to do more than just make a bunch of unsubstantiated claims about causality.
We have produced a chart under our auspices, gleaning from background physical concepts of the evolutionary model on the bottom.
Work has been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters.
Big Bang theory or steady state theory all involve various areas of expression. And we have seen in the last lecture that that just won't work.
I feel like Carl and I watched entirely different episodes.
Now let's see if creation will work. In the beginning, God.
A phrase that explains more or less nothing. What about the existence of God and his creation of the universe lets you predict future data? Beyond perhaps just that one ought to be able to predict future data at all, which is a philosophical rather than a strictly scientific question.
The God of the Bible is a God consistent with the universe that he designed. For instance, in the universe you find triplets. In human expression you find a response to triplets.
God is dunking on the Doublemint twins by going for triplets.
In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln used triplets, and that's one of the reasons it's permanently etched in the minds and attention of men worldwide through the centuries. Triplets in the Bible, triplets in the universe are observed. For instance, you'll find energy, motion, and phenomena.
Naming 3 random things doesn't make them a special set of 3. Let's add matter, space, and time. Oh look, now it's a hextuplet. We can add quantum fields and now it's a who knows how many tuplet. But even if we had found a real set of 3, so what? That some things exist in a natural set of 3 isn't exactly evidence for the Trinity, since we know that's what he's getting at. You would have to show some good reason why the only way we'd expect such a set of 3 to exist is if a triune God made them. I feel like we're going to skip that part of the argument.
You'll find time as past, present, and future. You'll find that the biblical concept of God and the logical concept of God is not 1 plus 1 plus 1, but instead it's 3 in 1, 1 times 1 times 1.
I don't care. This isn't an ecumenical council. I'm not going to promulgate a new or updated creed. Let's just call it here and then pick it up with the next point after the number 3 can be found in place, and the Trinity is an idea, kind of. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was, again in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Whispers, Denny5252, Elron Teller, Phil Rivara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, Strawberry Vein, Star Runner, and Dr. Tapioca Weasel. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.